Welcome back to BT Vancouver. Tuesday morning here, 7:49, and we're going to bring in a very special guest right now. We're talking about ending the systemic racism in Canada, in North America, in the world in general. And our recent special, which highlighted this, featured a prominent member of the media and a contributor with Maclean's magazine, Andray Domise. We're going to bring him in right now to open up this conversation. Welcome to BT this morning.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, now let's talk about the ongoing protests in the wake of the death of George Floyd. Are you surprised that this movement has gathered so much support worldwide?
No, I'm not surprised. It's because the protests aren't only in the wake of the death of George Floyd. It's Ahmaud Arbery, it's Breonna Taylor, it's a multitude of people that, for whatever reason, whenever the police come in contact with vulnerable and marginalized populations, this happens to be the results. I mean, we don't even know 1% of the names of those who've died at the hands of police over the last 4 to 5 years. So I think that while there's a global pandemic happening, while there is an economic retrenchment happening, this is entirely too much for people to take all at once.
The main term we keep hearing is systemic racism when it comes to our Canadian history, especially in the United States. What is your issue with that term in terms of it being very complicated?
It's not an issue with the term. It's an issue with the way that people approach it. And people talk about systemic racism as though there are people with individuated racisms. There are people with some very bad ideas about the world that they carry into systems and then sort of pollute those systems with their racist thoughts. And that's just not the way that it works. Systemic racism is the sort of racism that is inbuilt into institutions. So the institutions themselves benefit from the purpose of racism. And one of the things that I find that people rarely talk about is that racism is itself productive. Racism is profitable. Racism is actually necessary in our system for the reproduction of capital. It helps drive down labor costs. It divides classes against one another. So we talk about racism as though it's something that lives inside of people's minds rather than it being a necessary part of our socioeconomic system.
It's interesting. I've never heard it referred to in that sense, so it's a really creative way to frame it. I'm wondering, in terms of idealism versus pragmatism, why is it hard to actually take action in terms of stopping this, because it is so deeply rooted?
Well, because we tend to think of racism and white supremacy as systems and modes of human thought that are primordial, that are just a part of human nature, and that's absolutely not true. We can point to a timeline of white supremacy. There was no such thing as whiteness, really, if you go back before the 15th century. If we talk about, for example, the combination of commerce with the exploitation of human labor, with the concept of race, this takes place over the course of hundreds of years. It's not something that just emerged fully formed like Athena from the head of Zeus. If you want to talk about the beginning of slavery, for example, the first African captives are brought back from the Arguin Islands by the Portuguese voyager Nuno Justo in 1441. If you want to talk about the birth of market commerce, this is the 12th century. If you want to talk about the invention of race, whiteness, and so forth, this is the 18th century. So this is being refined and developed over the course of hundreds of years. And then we think that our systems are infected with this racism, and how can this possibly happen? Because what is wrong with humans? Well, what's wrong are the systems that we've built that have racism prefigured into them, and then we wonder why we can't get rid of it.
And your recent piece for Maclean's talks about how Canada shares the blame in terms of having systemic racist roots. Is it more overt in the United States and more hidden in Canada? And what kind of role do we play in that history?
Oh, no. I mean, it's been overt in Canada for a very long time. We just like to think that we're different. I mean, consider the fact that when black refugees were fleeing Jim Crow violence in Oklahoma, and this was during the Wilfrid Laurier administration, they faced higher obstacles to being able to get residency in Canada than their non-black peers. They had to pay a higher amount of money. They had to show a higher amount of cash on hand in order to be able to cross the border. And then people in the prairies in the western provinces were complaining about the influx of black people. There were letters to the editor that were going out to the oh my gosh, I forget the name of the major Winnipeg paper. This is what happens when you have toddlers and no sleep. Right. But there were letters to the editor saying that we hope that Jack Frost can accomplish what Jim Crow could not. There has always
Wow.
been a history of racism in this country, and there's always been a history of anti-black racism in this country. We like to pretend that there was some sort of branding or a brand switch that went from indigenous to black and back again. It doesn't work that way. There is a system of white supremacy that predicates itself on the ownership and reproduction of goods that pertain to only one class of people, and that is people who believe and accept that they are white. And this happens over top of indigenous sovereignty. This happens over the top of the human rights and self-determination of black people. It has always been present with Canada. Even when we talk about, for example, our police forces, the RCMP were plains clearers. They were active participants in a genocide. In the United States, the police were developed out of slave catchers. The entire institution of policing developed out of the Irish constabulary, which was itself an occupying army that Britain imposed itself on Ireland. So when I say that these institutions have had racism baked in from the very beginning, this is what I'm referring to.
All right, Andray, unfortunately, we have to leave it there for time. It's a complex issue, and I'm hoping that we can contact you down the road and get you back on. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, you take care. That's Andray Domise. He's a historian and contributor to Maclean's magazine, and we'll be back with more BT after this.